Hello everyone, I am Alex, and today we'll be talking about the science film called Total Recall. Hope you like it. In the year 2084, humans managed to colonize Mars, with Vilos Cohagen appointing himself as the leader of the Mars Federal Colony. On Earth, a construction worker named Douglas Quaid is having a dream about exploring Mars with an unknown woman. He wakes up panting, and his wife Lori consoles him by giving him sweet kisses. As it turns out, this is not the first time Douglas dreamt of Mars and the unknown woman. After a while, when he is preparing their breakfast, he sees the news about the uprising on Mars. Last night, the freedom fighters, led by a Martian named Quado, stopped the mining of a mineral called turbinium ore. Despite the attack, Cohagen assures that everything is under control by the military. Seeing her husband focused on the news, Lori turns off the TV. She points out that he is always having the same dreams about Mars because he keeps watching the news. At this time, Douglas tells Lori that maybe it's time for them to move to Mars. However, Lori doesn't like the idea and outright declines her husband's request. On his way to work, Douglas sees an advertisement about Recall Incorporated. It is a company that sells an implant of fake but realistic memories. At work, he talks to his friend Harry about Recall and asks for his advice. Without hesitation, Harry discourages Douglas to go there, saying that the implantation is dangerous. Yet, Douglas still goes to Recall after work and meets with an employee named Bob. He asks Douglas about what memory he wants to get. Upon saying that he wants a memory of traveling to Mars, Bob tries to convince him to get a Saturn trip instead. But he is determined to have a fake memory of going to Mars. When the man finally agrees to his wish, Douglas asks how safe the procedure will be. At this time, Bob shows him a chart that proves that all the operations done in Recall were safe. Then, he suggests to Douglas a new package that Recall is offering. In this trip package, Douglas will be portrayed as a different person when he goes to Mars. He declines at first, but upon seeing a secret agent in the choices of persona, he takes the offer. A little later, the operation begins with Dr. Lull taking over. For the false memory to be perfect, she asks what type of woman he wants to be with on his secret agent mission to Mars. Remembering the woman from his dreams, he picks a brunette woman to be his partner. After that, Douglas dozes off as the implantation begins. A little later, Bob is talking to another client when Dr. Lull suddenly calls him to the operating room. There, he finds the doctor and her assistant restraining Douglas, who is currently getting aggressive. According to Dr. Lull, Douglas is having a schizoid embolism, and they hit a memory cap on Douglas's brain during the implantation. Then, all of a sudden, Douglas gets out of restraint and chokes Bob. Seeing this, the doctor orders her assistant to inject Douglas with sedatives to make him fall asleep. When the situation calms down, she states that someone must have erased Douglas's memory. However, during the implantation, they unintentionally tap into it. At this moment, the team realizes that they meddle with Cohagen's schemes. Due to this, they decide to cover up what happened and pretend that Douglas has never come to them. When Douglas wakes up, he finds himself in a cab on his way home, not remembering anything that happened. As he reaches his apartment building, a couple of guys take Douglas to a corner where no one will see them. And to his surprise, Harry is leading the men. Douglas pleads to his friend that he has done nothing wrong in Recall, but Harry is determined to kill him because he went there. As it turns out, Harry is working for Cohagen's agency and is tasked to watch over Douglas. With no other options, Douglas fights and takes them all out. He cannot believe what just happened and immediately goes home to his wife. Upon seeing Lori, He immediately tells her what happened. Weirdly, Laurie asks what he did in Recall instead of asking how he is. When he says that he went there to have a fake memory of a trip to Mars, Laurie gets angry at him. She then states that everything that happened is just a delusion, a side effect of the fake memory implantation. But Douglas shows his hands covered in blood, proving that he's not delusional. After that, he goes to the bathroom to wash off the blood. At the same time, Laurie calls a man named Richter. Then, all of a sudden, she shoots at Douglas as soon as he opens the bathroom door. He tries to fend off Laurie without hurting her. While doing so, Douglas asks why Laurie is attacking him, but she just continues her assault. At this time, he manages to restrain her and orders Laurie to explain everything to him at gunpoint. Scared to die, Laurie reveals that she is not Douglas's wife and that their so-called marriage is just a memory implant. She turns out to be working for Cohagen's agency as well. Douglas sits in disbelief and takes a moment to absorb everything he just heard. Laurie takes this opportunity to flirt with Douglas, saying that he's the best assignment she's ever had. But Douglas realizes that she's just buying some time for her reinforcements to arrive. He then knocks her out and flees the apartment. Richter, who's Laurie's real husband, arrives shortly after. He immediately asks Laurie what Douglas remembers, and luckily for them, he still doesn't recall a thing. Using a tracking device, they discover that Douglas is heading to the subway. When Richter and his men are about to catch Douglas, they start shooting at him. Cornered, Gugals brutally uses a man as a meat shield while exchanging fires with his enemies. After that, he catches up to a train and shoots through a window for him to jump inside. Failing to apprehend Douglas, Richter, along with his right-hand man, Helm, goes back to the car. Then, he receives a call from Cohagen, who orders him to bring Douglas to him alive. At this moment, Helm manages to track Douglas again, and they immediately go where he is. Meanwhile, Douglas checks in at a hotel. In his room, he receives a call from an unknown man who warns him that Richter is already coming for him. The man reveals to Douglas that a tracking device is implanted in his skull. He then orders Douglas to wrap a wet towel around his head to muffle the signal. Afterward, he tells him to look outside the window. There, Douglas sees the man in the phone booth holding a suitcase. In fact, the two of them were buddies from the agency on Mars before, and Douglas asked the man to find him when he disappeared and to return his suitcase. After the call, Douglas picks up the suitcase and immediately leaves the place. He hijacks a cab and goes to an old cement factory and inspects the items inside the suitcase, one of which is a video recording of himself. In the video, Douglas introduces himself as Carl Hauser, who used to work for Cohagen. But when he met a woman from the Resistance, he fell in love and decided to quit. That is why he was thrown out back to Earth and given a new personality in the name of Douglas Quaid. Carl also adds that he needs to remember everything and stop Cohagen's evil plan. Following the instructions on the video, Douglas removes the tracking device from his head. After that, he gets instructed to go back to Mars and use the ID from the suitcase to enter the Hilton Hotel. Just then, Richter and his reinforcement arrive at the cement factory. Seeing them, Douglas immediately takes everything he needs and destroys the video recording before escaping. However, Douglas doesn't manage to completely destroy the video recording, allowing Richter to know that he is going to the Red Planet. When Douglas arrives on Mars, he disguises himself as a woman and uses a fake passport to go through the immigration officer. Shortly after, Richter also arrives on Mars. He is greeted by Cohagen's men, saying that their boss wants to see him. At this point, Douglas's fake head malfunctions, causing a commotion at the airport when other passengers see that something is happening to his head. Richter sees it and immediately realizes that the woman is Douglas in disguise. Thinking quickly, Douglas removes the fake head and throws it at the agents. Just then, it exploded, causing panic among other passengers. Richter, on the other hand, shoots at Douglas but hits a window instead. Because of this, the air pressure from the outside starts sucking them out. Fortunately, Douglas manages to grab onto a pole until an employee enables the lockdown protocol to seal the place. Seeing this, he immediately gets out before he gets locked inside the airport. After some time, Richter arrives to Cohagen's office. There, Cohagen scolds him for trying to kill Douglas and for letting him escape. Afterward, he briefs Richter about their situation on Mars. As it turns out, their opponent Quado wants the information inside Carl's head. There is a rumor that the leader of the freedom fighter is a psychic, so there is a high chance that he will get what he wants if he gets Douglas. But Cohagen has already devised a plan to prevent it from happening. Meanwhile, Douglas reaches the Hilton Hotel and presents the ID to the receptionist. Identifying himself as Mr. Brubaker, he gets a room to settle in. The receptionist also notices that he has left something on the safety deposit box and gives it to him. Checking it, Douglas finds a poster of the last resort in Venice-ville with a note saying that he should find a woman named Melina. So instead of resting, he decides to go to the last resort. Upon reaching the place, Benny, the taxi driver, walks with him to the place, which turns out to be a bar. Douglas thanks him and pays him a lot of money. Due to this, Benny decides to wait for him. Looking around the bar, Douglas asks the bartender for Melina. When the bartender calls Melina, Douglas recognizes her as the woman from his dreams. Furthermore, Melina and her friends seem to know Douglas and they call him Hauser. Upon seeing him, Melina takes him to somewhere private. After a hard slap, she starts ranting about him disappearing and not contacting her. Not knowing what the woman is talking about, Douglas cannot speak a single word. Just then, Melina hugs him tightly and starts giving him kisses. The truth is that Melina is his real wife. Douglas stops her and explains that he cannot remember anything about her because Cohagen altered his memories. He also adds that he is now known as Douglas. However, Melina doesn't believe him and thinks he's still working for Cohagen. Frustrated, she orders him to leave despite his plea for help. Without other options, he decides to go back to the hotel. There, he watches the news that Cohagen is declaring martial law throughout Mars Federal Colony. Shortly after, he gets a visit from a doctor named Edgemar who claims that he works for Recall. After making sure the doctor is unarmed and alone, Douglas drags him inside the room. There, Dr. Edgemar tells Douglas that he is not truly on Mars at the moment. The doctor is trying to convince him that he is still at the Recall facility back on Earth and is still dreaming. As a last resort, the doctor opens the door and reveals Lori, who tries to convince Douglas to come home to her. At this time, he hands Douglas a pill that will supposedly make him sleep and wake him up back to reality. Still not believing the doctor's and Lori's words, Douglas points his gun at the doctor. He asks if it's okay for him to shoot Dr. Edgemar since they're just in a dream. Trying to remain calm, Dr. Edgemar reasons that if he does that, no one will guide him back to reality. But when he sees a drop of sweat on the doctor's face, Douglas doesn't hesitate to shoot him in the head. Just then, Cohagen's men barge into the room and attack him. Outnumbered, Douglas is apprehended and Lori kicks him in the face and nuts. When they are about to bring Douglas down the elevator, Melina appears and begins to shoot at them. Lori manages to take cover and fights Melina afterward. She manages to get the upper hand, almost killing Melina during their fight. But Douglas regains his consciousness and takes her down for good. The two escape just in time before Richter and Helm arrive at the scene. Shortly after, Douglas and Melina hop on Benny's cab, which happens to pass by the hotel. However, Richter and Helm are just on their tail, shooting at them. Unfortunately, Benny's cab loses its brakes and they crash into an establishment. With no other choice, the three of them have to run on foot. Richter and Helm now with more reinforcements, keep chasing them either. When the three reach the last resort, a mutant named Tony helps them escape by guiding them through a secret door. Afterward, everyone on the bar covers for them when Richter and his men arrive. However, being the ruthless man he is, Richter orders his men to kill everyone in the bar. Because of this, a fight breaks out when the people in the bar defend their lives. Seeing that they are losing, Richter escapes through a window. He then receives a call from Cohaagen, who orders him to pull out of Venusville immediately. As it turns out, Cohaagen plans to turn off the machine that provides oxygen for the people of Venusville. After a while, freedom fighters find Douglas and others and escort them to their base. There, a man named George takes Douglas to a private room to meet with Cueto. Surprisingly, Cueto is a mutant that is growing from his brother George's body. Holding on to Douglas's hands, Cueto starts reading his mind. It is revealed that Cohaagen and his men discovered a very old alien reactor built into a mountain where they are mining turbinium. This reactor, once activated, will produce breathable air for everyone on Mars, but it will also destroy all the turbinium orbs, finishing off Cohaagen's dream of taking over Mars's resources. At this time, the mind reading is interrupted by the enemies who conduct an assault against the freedom fighters. The five of them immediately escape together. Just when they think they are safe, Benny, who turns out to be working for Cohaagen all along, suddenly shoots George and Cueto. Opening up the door, Richter and his men finally arrive. Seeing this, Cueto asks Douglas to start the reactor and free Mars before he is shot to the head by Richter. Afterward, the agents take Douglas and Melina to Cohaagen. Upon seeing the couple, Cohaagen thanks Douglas for completing the mission of eradicating the resistance. Confused, Douglas asks what he is talking about. According to Cohaagen, he and Carl purposely created him for this mission. With Douglas not knowing anything, the psychic was not able to read his true intentions. This will allow the agency to follow him to the base of the freedom fighters. Moreover, the suitcase, the fake head, and the money are all set up by the agency for him to get back to Mars. Just then, Cohaagen shows him another video recording of Carl. In the video, Carl seconded all of Cohaagen's claims. The video ends with Carl telling Douglas that he will get his body back now that his mission is done. Afterward, they strap Douglas and Melina into a memory machine just like those in Recall to alter their memories. When Cohaagen and Richter leave, Douglas breaks out of restraint and kills the doctors around him. After freeing Melina, they arm themselves and find a way to escape. In his office, Cohaagen receives the news about Douglas and Melina escaping. Now, he finally gives Richter the go signal to kill them. In the meantime, Douglas and Melina are on their way to the mines to activate the reactor, but the road is blocked. To make matters worse, they are cornered by Benny, who's driving a driller vehicle. Thinking quickly, Douglas uses a handheld drill to kill Benny inside. Fortunately for them, the driller opens up a passageway to the mines. Shortly after, Richter and his men also arrive at the mines. Seeing Douglas, they immediately shoot at him from all sides. But as it turns out, it's just a projection of him, and Douglas comes out of hiding, shooting back at them. Finally, he comes face to face against Richter, and they have a brawl in the elevator. Their fight ends with Richter falling to his death after his arms got cut off by the lift. When Douglas is about to start the reactor, Cohaagen shows up and stops him by pointing a gun at him. The two argue about turning on the reactor. Cohaagen warns the reactor will kill all of them because it will melt the core of the planet continuously. But Douglas is not buying his lies. Being in his last straw, Cohaagen threatens to blow the mines, killing him and Melina. Then all of a sudden, he is shot by Melina. Yet Cohaagen still manages to detonate the bomb. Acting quickly, Douglas throws the bomb away. However, the explosion breaks the dome, causing the air to suck them out. Luckily for them, Douglas and Melina manage to grab onto something before they fly out of the mines. But Cohaagen is not so lucky, and he gets sucked out of the mountain. When the toxic air of Mars gets to him, he finally dies. Just then, Douglas activates the reactor. Losing their grip, Douglas and Melina get sucked out of the mountain as well. The activation of the reactor causes a massive explosion in the mountain. Douglas and Melina suffer at first because of the toxic air, but later on, the explosion results in a breathable atmosphere on the whole planet of Mars. Douglas and Melina, even the people of Venusville, manage to survive. Everyone looks up at the sky, staring in awe. The movie ends with Douglas and Melina sharing a passionate kiss as the sun shines brightly on Mars. The original Total Recall, released in 1990, is a great sci-fi movie that was released during those times. The practical and special effects also add more punch to the greatly written script. This movie works so great that it had a remake in 2012. Lastly, the plot twist of the movie is definitely unforeseen, which makes it more interesting to watch.